So the theme of today's service is a bigger container, which is a Zen concept I learned about in my young adulthood. You see, I was in my mid to late 20s when I stumbled upon a book called Everyday Zen by an American Zen teacher named Charlotte Joko Beck. I knew nothing about Zen or Buddhism when I picked up the book. And this was even about 10 years before I became a Unitarian Universalist. You see, a long time ago, I had rejected my Christian Protestant upbringing. And at the time, I had really made no efforts toward having a spiritual life. But yet, it was a time in my life when the pressures were mounting, and I had no strategy for coping other than just plowing straight through ahead. And as a result, my mental and emotional health were suffering. I was trying so hard to be that young, successful woman who could meet all the expectations of the people around me, including my extremely demanding boss, my husband who traveled a lot on business, leaving me alone with a lot of responsibilities at home, and my parents who never seemed to be really pleased with me. It is no wonder I was crumbling under the weight of everyone's expectations, which I ultimately learned were often not their expectations, but my own. And I have to say that the teachings I found in the Everyday Zen book changed my life. I sometimes describe my casual Zen study as having rewired my brain and changing my consciousness. But, essentially I benefited from what is an ancient and practical self-help system. And the concept I remembered most when I read this book, the most profound one that has stayed with me over decades, is this metaphor called a bigger container. So now I'm going to share with you the reading on a bigger container from this book by Charlotte Joko Beck. And then after that, I'll share my own little riff on it. So she says, we can talk about oneness, meaning the oneness of us, the oneness of everything. She says, until the cows come home. But how do we actually separate ourselves from others? How? The pride out of which anger is born is what separates us. And the solution is a practice in which we experience this separating emotion as a definite bodily state. When we do, a bigger container is created. What is created, what grows, is the amount of life I can hold without it upsetting or dominating me. That's the definition of the bigger container. What is created, what grows, is the amount of life I can hold without it upsetting or dominating me. She continues, at first, this space is quite restricted. Then it's a bit bigger, and then it's bigger still. It need never cease to grow. And the enlightened state is that enormous and compassionate space of the bigger container. But as long as we live, we find there is a limit to our container's size. And it is at that point that we must practice. And how do we know where this cutoff point is? We are at that point when we feel any degree of upset, of anger. It's no mystery at all. And the strength of our practice is how big that container gets. The practice of making a bigger container is essentially spiritual because it is essentially nothing at all. A bigger container is not a thing. Awareness is not a thing. The witness is not a thing or person. There is not somebody witnessing the bigger container. Nevertheless, that which can witness my mind and body must be other than my mind and body. If I can observe my mind and body in an angry state, who is this I who observes? It shows me that I am other than my anger, bigger than my anger, and this knowledge enables me to build a bigger container to grow. So what must be increased is the ability to observe. What we observe is always secondary. It isn't important that we are upset. What is important is to observe the upset. As the ability grows, first to observe and second to experience, two factors simultaneously increase. One, wisdom increases. That's the ability to see life as it is, not the way I want it to be. And two, compassion, which is the natural action which comes from seeing life as it is. We can't have compassion for anyone or anything if our encounter with them is ensnarled in pride and anger. It's impossible. Compassion grows as we create a bigger container. So that's the end quote. There's a lot of classic Zen stuff in there. So I'm going to try and tell you what creating a bigger container means for me in more practical language and how it works. And this is going to be a little weird, and I can't say it's all Zen teacher approved, but it's what I got. So in my imagination, my container is in my body. I think it's somewhere around my stomach and chest cavity, which makes sense. These are containers normally for food or for air. And I mostly notice this container when it's overflowing, when things have gone wrong, when the red alert status and the alarms are, flashing and screaming at me. These are the times when the challenges of life and the emotions and thoughts associated with life are exceeding my capacity to contain them. You could also call this freaking out. That's the technical term. So for me, this usually means anxiety or frustration or anger. Or other times it can mean low and depressed feelings, depending on the particular nature of the overflow. And a lot of us were dealing with some pretty full containers even before this pandemic happened. And now, because that one more thing, that pandemic has been added, our containers are overflowed with anxiety, grief, sometimes disappointment about what we can't do, plans that have been canceled, and of course, fear. So now that we've established this idea that we have containers, or that we are containers, what do we do when they're overflowing? How do we make them bigger? How do we increase the capacity to hold more life stuff? Well, the answer from the reading is that we have to step outside ourselves. And we have to look at our thoughts and our feelings as if we are an outside observer, which I have to tell you is really hard when you are in that overflow, freaking out state, right? But that's why practicing when we're not in the overflow state is so important. And we can practice this through meditation, which is a great way to be skilled at observing your mind and your feelings to get to the bottom of them. Because once you get to the bottom of them, you realize the ultimate reality of these thoughts and feelings. And when we realize the unrealness and the transience of our thoughts and emotions, we can feel them, but they no longer dominate us. And it's this realization, this constant work and practice that helps make our container bigger. So for me, when I'm feeling on overflow, yes, sometimes I just freak out. I'm being very honest here. But when I'm being more mindful, I try to calm down and take inventory of my container. What exactly has caused the overflow? Let's just say it's the pandemic taking up way too much space in my container. And for me, the pandemic in my container, it looks something like a blob, like the invasion of the blob from those 1950s, cult movies. It's just this big, ugly blob. Now, I can't really make the blob disappear because that would be denial. That would be like saying, oh, nothing's wrong, everything's great, blah, blah, blah. That's not healthy either. But I can watch the blob. I can examine it. And what I can do, if I can't get rid of the blob, I can at least try to let go of the feelings associated with that blob, the feelings that are not serving any purpose or serving me. I can try and let go of the fear and the anxiety and the inconvenience and the frustration with the pandemic blob. It's still there, but I can expand my ability to contain my reaction to it, to live without that blob, that pandemic blob upsetting or dominating me. Now, unfortunately, this is not an easy or a once and done kind of practice. On a bad anxiety day, that blob can pop up like a really bad whack-a-mole game, right? But the more you work with it, the more you practice, the less overwhelming the thoughts and the feelings will be. Often, if I'm doing inventory on my container that is all of life's events, I find in there some stuff that I'm not sure should even be in there in the first place. I find what I like to call OPB, other people's baggage. There's other people's stuff in my container. Can you believe that? Now, I'm not saying that we should not be compassionate and empathetic when it comes to other people and their baggage, because of course, we all have baggage, right? But there's a difference between empathy and compassion and taking on the emotional lives of others as if they were our own. I mean, this is where all those things the psychologists call codependence and emotional fusion and bad boundaries come in. Our containers become full with stuff that is not ours. And learning to understand and regulate our own minds and emotions, that can take a lifetime of hard work. So why in the world do we want to take on responsibility for the thoughts and feelings of others? That is a very heavy burden. So now let me rewind and tell you more about my experience with the bigger container 25 years ago and how it helped me. The bigger container taught me that I was more than the expectations of others and the expectations I put on myself. I learned that I did not have to live life on overflow, that I had a place to put all of life's ups and downs, and that if I practiced, I would be better able to contain them and less reactive to them. And by seeing myself as a container and knowing I could make space in it, it made me feel empowered. It made me feel like I had some agency in my life, that I was so much more than the latest difficulty or drama life threw at me. I began to see a self that was more than what was reflected back by the people around me, people who also had overflowing containers of their own. Now, the bigger container metaphor was not the only thing I learned from my readings in Zen. There were many other powerful concepts such as non-attachment and how our egos get us into trouble. There's mindfulness, there's living in the moment. But the lesson that rests in my body, I can say pretty much every day, is still the bigger container. Now, I'm not going to lie, my container still goes on overflow, and there is still so much more expanding to do. But for me, this idea, this simple idea, this mind game has been transformational. When I was a hospital chaplain, I relied on the vastness and openness of this container to hold all of the pain and the sadness and death I witnessed on a daily basis. And having that container made me able to hold it and still be helpful despite all of the disturbing things happening around me. And the container has given me a place to hold in a healthy, non-reactive way all the difficult things life has thrown at me, even though sometimes I'd mess it all up and I still freak out. But regardless, I hope there is something in this concept that you can relate to and find some meaning in, especially nowadays when it appears we might need it more than ever. May it be so, and blessed be. All right, so now we've come to that point in our service where it's time to do our virtual offering. Thanks to everyone who has been sending in their monthly contributions to the church automatically. That is very helpful for us to maintain our cash flow while people are not coming into the church on Sundays. During our offering, it's also a great time to write a check, your monthly check to the church, get it ready to put in the mail, or also having checks sent through your bank every month is a very cost-effective way to support the church and pay your pledge. You can also give online. The link to the online giving is in the chat, or you can read the instructions on your screen. If you would like to make just a plate offering today, please do so. Just keep in mind that for larger gifts, credit card fees can be pretty steep. Again, our church, although we're not meeting in person on Sundays, nothing has really stopped, including our bills. And keeping up with your pledge and your support will ensure that there is a church to come back to when we're all allowed outside again. So, with that in mind, our offering will now be given and gratefully received.
In these hard times there will always be singing, always be singing. In these hard times, in these hard times there will always be singing, always be singing. In these hard times, in these hard times there will always be singing, always be singing. In these hard times, in these hard times there will always be singing, always be singing. In these hard times, in these hard times there will always be singing, always be singing. In these hard times, in these hard times there will always be singing, always be singing. In these hard times, in these hard times there will always be singing, always be singing. In these hard times, in these hard times there will always be singing, always be singing. In these hard times.
I'll tell you about our final song. It's called We Are One by Brian Tate. And like some of the other videos we've seen before, it's a virtual gathering of children's choirs from around the world, including Boston, Washington, D.C., London, Moscow, Dublin, and Estonia. And it's very sweet. So now I will extinguish our chalice and share with you some words by Amy Zucker Morgenstern. Never has it been more than true now. We extinguish this flame, but the sparks within us remain alight. For each of us in our supposed solitude, the signals buzz and hum, sparkling through space to one another, connecting us invisibly, but palpably. We are one, and from every window, our light shines. So please, after our music, stay logged in if you'd like to join in our virtual coffee time chat, or join us again at 12:30 for learning and discussion of the Yoga Sutras, or 2 p.m. for children's religious exploration. So I look forward to seeing you, even if it is on a screen. My friends, go in peace. Go with the strength of resilience and return in the full knowing, the full realization that you are loved and you are not alone. Amen and blessed be.